Glory to thee, our God, glory to thee, O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, who abides everywhere and fills all things. Treasury of blessing, giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us from all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. Amen. All right. Okay, well, let's jump in. So this is kind of what we're covering in macro, so I won't spend any real time on that. So up to this point, we've been talking about kind of history and theology. So we've been talking about basically councils. We talked about, the first class we talked about like various pre-council creeds. And then last week we kind of got into the legalization with the Edict of Milan and then the first 6 councils. How you doing, Jason? And this is the other thing I stressed, and I think this is an important quote from St. Gregory the theologian, because it really kind of stresses what we see again and again and again in all of these ecumenical councils. St. Gregory says, "For that which he has not assumed, he has not killed. That which is united to his Godhead is also saved." Right. So, and again, when going through all the councils, what we see again and again and again is this insistence on the part of the church that Christ have everything that humanity has and everything that divinity has. So neither of those things are allowed to be absent. So we talked about it last time, but I'll just do a quick. This is kind of what we ended on, and that was after the sixth. So the Sixth Ecumenical Council, we kind of mentioned that like the councils did primarily two things. They hammered out theological details, and they also created canons, which were basically kind of guidelines for how the church is to run, relating to fasting, relating to setting the date for Easter, relating to what a bishop can do and what a bishop can't do, and all this stuff. So they had a council after the Sixth Council, which they called basically the Sixth Council of Trullo. And really, it was really didn't really do any theological stuff. They really just did more administrative canon law related stuff. We talked about this council, condemned the Armenian Christian practice of when they make communion, they would only put in wine, they wouldn't put in water. So they were told that they weren't supposed to do that. The idea, apparently, there was this concept of choosing the children of clergy to succeed, the clergy. So that was also kind of not blessed. And then various other like fasting, other things. So those are some examples. Like another thing it said is that you didn't have to be celibate to be ordained, which was the kind of the Western custom, and a few other things. So the other things it did also at this council was that it made an official list of all the councils and all the writings of the saints that were considered to be on par with the ecumenical council stuff, what they said. So there were like the 85 apostolic canons, the Synod of Ankara and Cairo. These were all councils that were sort of raised to sort of an ecumenical status. And also the writing of certain fathers, which like Dionysius of Alexandria, Gregory the Wonder Worker, Peter of Alexandria, they had canons. So you can see how many are attributed to them. So Peter of Alexandria had 15 canons that thing had written that were basically kind of promoted, or what is it when they were raised up to the status of being ecumenical, basically. 92 of canons of St. Basil of the Great. So anyway, that was last week. Finally, so that was the first through the sixth, and then this fifth, sixth council. Finally, we come to seventh ecumenical council, kind of the best known. It's council where the icons were restored. So for about a century, let's see here. The council assembled in 787 AD Nicaea to restore the use and veneration of icons, which had been suppressed by imperial edict inside the Byzantine Empire during the reign of Leo III his son Constantine V had held the Council of Curia to make the suppression official. So again, for about 100 years, council icons were not allowed; they were forbidden. And really, the backstory of that is that I think Leo. What I have heard is that Leo III, during his reign, the Byzantine Empire was sort of shrinking because maybe the Muslims were sort of making headway. And someone or a group of people sort of advised him that, the reason that God is shrinking, our empire is because we're worshiping these icons. And some of that also was sort of a Muslim influence because Muslims don't have any images. They reject images. They're very strict about that. And so that was kind of the backstory of how this even, came to being in the first place. So the council determined that the honorary veneration, ti mitiki proskinesis, icons, was permitted, and the true adoration, alithi ni latria, was reserved for God alone. So there was a distinction made between the veneration given to icons and what we might call worship would be only offered to God. That was kind of the distinction that the council made. It first stated that the honor paid to the icon eventually passes over to the individual that is represented. So when I kiss an icon of St. Catherine the Great up on the wall there, I'm really, it's almost like there's a divine postal service that takes my honor and sort of delivers it to her in heaven, right? Kind of a real simple way of looking at it. Is that, yeah. Say that again.
So if I ordered an icon, does the icon itself need to be venerated by the Holy Father? Legitimate. What if the one from, let's say, eBay? And I maybe it was venerated by anybody.
Say, so there's, and this is kind of further than I want to go too far, but there's certain, I would say this. I would say that I don't know that it really, I mean, I don't know where where it's kind of gray, it's a gray area, but I would say that certainly, iconography is a holy endeavor, right? And so we don't want some, neo-pagan Wicca witch to be painting icons for us, right? So that probably wouldn't be good. So I mean, I think it's, I think whether or not it's venerated by like a Holy Father, I think the real issue is, I think church would say there's certain stylistic realities present in Orthodox icon. So we wouldn't take like photo, like literally some saints existed when photography existed. So there are photographs of St. John of Kronstadt. There are photographs of St. Nectarius Pentapolis. There are photographs of St. John Maximovich. But we probably would put, if we were to put one of those up by where our icons are, we would probably put it off to the side. We wouldn't put it, we would put an icon in the center. We wouldn't put a picture, right? So there are certain, I think, distinctions made. Does that answer your question? Yeah, so that's the other thing. Typically, when we get an icon, what the practice is actually to bring it to the church, and there's actually behind the altar table, there's like literally like a little cave, like a little nook cut out of it, and practice put an icon in that for 40 days prior to actually, putting on our wall. And there's also a prayer service that is a very brief prayer service that the priest can say to sort of bless the icon. So these are part of the practice as well. Yeah, yeah. Wait, Adrian?
Yes.
Adrian, I'm sorry.
But they're back to the same, just like, yeah. Kind of similar. What if an image could be tested with and that one actually had to be
not a good image. And so the president lesson, he explained us why.
Yeah. Huh.
So he gets some markings that made the ends kind of like it's.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was, he said it was more of
Yeah. Well, that's a risk as well. No question about, yeah. So, yeah. So I think we, I mean, generally, if people want to buy icons, I usually direct them to places that I know they do a good job, I mean, most icons nowadays, it's unusual to have like a painted, and all the those little icons all the way around, those are just lithos. So they're like high quality reproductions, but they're not hand painted, it's expensive to hand paint. Yeah, I mean, I had two I recently commissioned. Both of them because of people that passed away, and they were $1,200 each. And they're beautiful, but yeah, they're not cheap. So let's keep reading. Thus, veneration of icon could not be idolatrous, as the iconoclasts believed. So the iconoclasts were those who wanted to get rid of the icons. That it literally means the word iconoclast means icon smasher, basically. The iconodual position, so those are the ones that love the icons. That's literally what it means. The iconodual position was not justified by Christological arguments, as in the Council of Hiera. Rather, the antiquity of iconodulia and the incarnation of Christ, which was said to make acceptable the depiction of Christ, were emphasized. We'll talk more about the theology behind icons in a couple of slides. This was actually, I believe, this and the next slide were actually written. These were sort of, I guess, creeds. I don't know if I'd call it a creed, but sort of an affirmations that were written at the council. So the council said the following: as the sacred and life-giving cross is everywhere set up as a symbol, so also should the images of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, the holy angels, as well as those of the saints and other pious and holy men, be embodied in the manufacture of sacred vessels, tapestries, vestments, etc., and exhibited on the walls of churches and the homes and in all conspicuous places by the roadside and everywhere, to be revered by all who might see them. For the more they are contemplated, the more they move to fervent memory of their prototypes, meaning the person or image or event depicted in the icon. Therefore, it is proper to accord to them a fervent and reverent veneration, not, however, the veritable adoration which, according to our faith, belongs to the divine being alone. Right? So we don't worship in the way we would worship God. For the honor accorded to the image passes over to the prototype. So when I have the icon, it passes to the person sort of depicted in that icon. And whoever venerates the image, venerate in it the reality of what is there represented. Right. So it's the idea that we aren't venerating the icon as an end in itself, because actually, I mean, there were really problems on both sides. There were those who wanted to get rid of the icons, and then there were those who were sort of overly venerating the icons, right? So you had people that would like take a little piece off of an icon and eat it or something, right? So that was also rejected, right? So the church was trying to find this balance between, worshiping the icons wrongly on the one hand, and then on the other, sort of rejecting the icons, unilaterally. So this is sort of a little side note. So this is an icon of St. John of Damascus. St. John of Damascus lived in the 4th century, and he originally was, well, actually, we can read his life. He was originally, I think, kind of nobility, but then he became a monk, and ultimately he became really probably the most significant defender of the icons. So he was a very important defender. He was also a very gifted hymnographer. In fact, there's I think 10 hymns that are sort of these famous hymns in the funeral service that are attributed to St. John of Damascus. But so this is his life in brief. John was first the chief minister to Caliph Abdul. So he actually lived in a region that was occupied by Muslims, by the what was that empire called? The Ottoman Empire. So he lived in an Ottoman occupied area. So he was a chief minister to Caliph Abdul Malik, and later a monk in the monastery of St. Savas the Sanctified. Because of his ardent defense and veneration of icons during the reign of the iconoclastic Emperor Leo the Isaurian, that was the Leo referenced a minute ago, John was maligned by the emperor to the caliph, who cut off his right hand, right? So he cut off his right hand because then he wouldn't be able to write things defending the icon. So that's what they did. They did that to St. Maximus the Confessor for a different reason, but they didn't want him. They actually cut out his tongue and his hand in the case of St. Maximus, because they didn't want him to speak and they didn't want him to write. So John fell down in prayer before the icon of the Most Holy Theotokos, and his hand was rejoined and miraculously healed. So the miracle attributed to the Virgin Mary, that after his hand was cut off, he prayed, and the Virgin Mary actually miraculously sort of put his hand back on him. Seeing the miracle, the caliph, this was the Muslim leader, governor, whatever, repented, but John no longer desired to remain with him as a nobleman. Instead, he withdrew to a monastery where, from the beginning, he was a model to the monks in humility, obedience, and all the prescribed rules of monastic asceticism. John composed the funeral hymn. So I'll jump ahead. So anyway, he died in the year 776 at the age of 104. Wow, long life. This is, I just put this up here again as a side note. There was an icon created to sort of commemorate the Virgin Mary restoring St. John's hand. It's called the Virgin Mary of the Three Hands. This is it. And you can see that there are three hands. Right? She has one here, and this is sort of the hand. I guess this is sort of the commemorative hand that was restored, that had been cut off of St. John's arm. Yeah, Adrian.
The one kind of miracles
So there's no record of any miracle like that. Is that what you're saying? You can't think of any. Yeah. This is similar. Yeah, post by. Yeah. So that's what this is anyway. So these are actually, I have here 3 different quotes from St. John of Damascus, sort of defending the icon. So he was as I said, he was really probably the most important writer in defense of the icons. So first quote, it says, "Worship is the symbol of veneration and honor. Let us understand that there are different degrees of worship. First of all, the worship of latria, that's a Greek word, which we show to God, who alone by nature is worthy of worship," right? So there's a distinction. When, for the sake of God, who is worshipful by nature, we honor his saints and servants, as Joshua and Daniel worshiped an angel, and David, his holy places, when be saved. That's interesting. That must have got cut off. The distinction makes though here is, I believe that there's latria and there's proskinesis. Latria is only given God. Proskinesis, I think, is the word. That is the veneration we give to the saints and to the icons and the like. That's one quote. Another one by St. John again. "I venerate it," meaning the icon, "though not as God. How could God be born out of lifeless things?" Meaning, so wood I venerated as God, it's just wood and paint. "And God's body is God by union, it is immutable. The nature of God remains the same as before. The flesh created in time is quickened by a logical and reasoning soul." So that's kind of a dense quote. Let me read the next one and then I'll go back. And this is another quote by St. John. "In former times," actually, this is really, forget the previous quote. This is a really important quote. So he says, in former times, God, who is without form or body, could never be depicted. So he's talking about here is in the Old Testament, right? So one of the commandments is you shall have no graven image. So he's referring to that. So in the Old Testament, before God took on flesh in the person of Jesus Christ, there was no depicting of God, right? But now, when God is seen in the flesh, conversing with men, I make an image of the God whom I see. I do not worship matter. I worship the creator of matter who became matter for my sake. So really, the way I would look at it is what he's saying is that if Christ truly became human, then we have to treat him the way we would treat any human, right? So we would have to say, I think we would have to then say that if you can make a depiction of me, right? You can draw a picture of me. Nobody has an argument with me. Then if you can't do that for Christ, there has to be something about him that's different than me, right? Remember what we said, that opening quote from St. Gregory, right? That it's not assumed is not saved, right? So that's really the point St. John is making, is that to deny the possibility of depicting Jesus Christ is in some way to deny his humanity is the same as my humanity, right? So that was obviously, again and again, the church rejected that. So any questions? All right. Well, now we're going to kind of jump to a very different, I thought I would just jump around today. We're going to talk about church architecture a little bit. No. That was what the church affirmed. The church said what the church affirmed was that if we can depict me, then we have to be able to depict Christ. So that was affirmed. What was rejected was the idea that somehow you can depict me, but you can't depict Christ. That was no. That's why we have icons. So church architecture. So this is, we're going to come back to this image again and again. It's a helpful kind of diagram of sort of the broad architecture of the church. So, you have the dome. Now our church is a little bit wonky, but you have the dome. Normally in the dome, you'd have this icon of Christ called the Pantocrator. We'll talk about that more later. Typically, sort of hanging under the dome, it has large chandelier called the horos. And then you have, again, we're going to talk about it more. You sort of really, they have it as four, but I would say three. There's sort of three sections to the church. There's the porch, which I'm not including. There's the narthex, which is sort of that back area. Actually, in our case, we have both a narthex and we have what's called an exonarthex. So the first area you enter, furthest back, that's the exonarthex. And then where the sand is and where you put your candle, that's the narthex. Then you have the nave. We're going to talk about these more in a minute. And then behind the icon screen up here, on the first side, you have the sanctuary. Then you have the various, items. You have, well, we're going to talk about these things as we go. So anyway, we'll come to this image again. So first of all, on a very, very macro level, typically the churches, I would say there's really two overall structures that churches are built in. There's a few exceptions, but primarily, so this is actually our church. This is literally a satellite of us. This is sort of called a cross form. It's not very crossy, but you can see how there's like a cross to it, right? There's extension and extension, right? So that's probably the most common layout for a church. So that's one of them. And then the other is sort of basically there's a term for it, but it's this rectangular style where it's elongated. Typically it has sort of a, like an A-frame type roof, and it just is long and rectangular. Within the church, as I mentioned, you have these three sections: the narthex, which is in the nave, which is where we are, and then the sanctuary on the far side of the icon screen. So the narthex. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit of license. So the narthex is the back room, or the exonarthex as well. It's sort of the connection between the outside world and the church. I mean, I have my own sort of sometimes I call it sort of, I call it the spiritual decompression chamber, right? Because really, ideally, I mean, obviously, you know, we're running around like chicken with our head cut off. It's hard to sort of leave that behind and sort of enter into the worship immediately. But the part of the goal of the narthex is sort of kind of leave all of our worldly cares behind. We come in, we make our cross, we venerate the icons, we light the candle, we say a prayer. So this is sort of the area where we sort of transition from the world to God's kingdom, right? The other thing about, well, let me talk about this. So we don't need to talk about that. If you have any questions, dive in. So the nave, which is the room we're in right here, the nave it actually comes from, because if you think of a word that the first three letters, NAV, right? You think navigation, navy, naval, right? So that word sort of harkened back to the idea of like Noah's Ark, right? So Noah's Ark was, only those on the ark were the ones who survived the flood, right? And so the church sort of imaged as this ark of salvation, right? That we get in it and it takes us to the other side of the sea of this life. Typically, as it says, the walls often, well, I mean, this icon this is a good image, right? So this is an image of a church, right? So frequently, especially like in Greece and in Russia, you'll see that like every square inch that can possibly be decorated is covered with icons, right? So here it's a perfect example. You got an icon of the baptism of Christ. You've got icons of various saints and other various saints. You got some of the, I'm not sure who, but the gospel writers. You've got, more saints. You've got the crucifixion. You've got the Virgin in the back, right? So typically, I mean, this could be the case in the narthex and in the sanctuary as well, but often the nave is just covered in iconography. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. Oftentimes, too, we really don't do this in America, but certainly if you were to go to like a monastery, like if you go to the monastery in Kedusha, the men always are all on this side, and the women all sit on that side. That's just kind of the way. And I think that sort of kind of ties back to the Jewish practice. In fact, now that I think about it, my previous parish, St. Basil in Chicago, actually was a synagogue. And we bought it from them and converted it. And it had a huge balcony. And if my memory is right, I think the balcony was where women sat and the men sat on the ground, right? You understand the kind of this idea of kind of even women covering their head. I think the whole idea is that, at least I could speak for men, but seeing a woman with hair all over doesn't help one focus in one's prayers, right? So the church kind of has done this. Obviously, we don't do that, but that had been a practice and still is, depending on where you go. Even in Greece, I think you would see that often. So then within the nave, we have the bishop's throne, which we have in our case right here to your right. And that really is just sort of when the bishop is here, he, depending on where we are in the service and which service we're doing, he often will be standing there and he sort of presides from there. And even when it's tea, it sort of is a symbol of the fact that we are connected to this greater body of Christ, which is the whole church, right? The whole world. Yeah, typically. I mean, it's funny because I actually was in a monastery recently and they didn't have a bishop's throne, but it was a very small church. And part of me wonders if they just couldn't fit it. But yes, I mean, very rarely have I ever, like, I can't think of a parish other than that monastery. I don't know of anywhere that hasn't had one. So yeah, typically it would. And that's where as I said, that's where the bishop would be during the service. And when he's not here, it sort of is a representation of our connection to greater church through our bishop.
That's one thing that I think is different from churches.
Don't have those?
I don't want to say no for sure, but I don't like this. When I was here the first time, just fell from my eye.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, really, I mean, because when we think about the global church, right? The way the church works, right, is that I am under a bishop. In our case, Nathaniel is his name. And Nathaniel, so when I celebrate liturgy, I commemorate Metropolitan Nathaniel. When Metropolitan Nathaniel celebrates liturgy, he commemorates, I believe, the Patriarch of Constantinople. When the Patriarch of Constantinople celebrates liturgy, he commemorates all of the primates of all the churches in America. So the Patriarch of Moscow, Patriarch of Serbia, Patriarch of Romania, right? And then those patriarchs are commemorated by the other bishops in Romania or Moscow or Serbia. And then those bishops are commemorated by their priests. So that's how we're all sort of, there's this sort of web that sort of connects us all. That makes sense? Yeah, sure. And then on the left-hand side, typically you have the pulpit, which is the case with us. And then usually there's a chant stand. Our chant stand is actually next to the bishop's, which is normally where it would be. Sometimes there's chant stands on both sides, just depending on the setup of the church. And then the next thing is the icon screen, which is this screen, big screen wall of icons that you see there. And that really, when icon screens started to be used, it was really more of like a rail. It's just a very simple, very not overwhelming thing that just separated the clergy. It was literally just a rail separating the clergy who are in the sanctuary from the people in the pews. And then over time, it sort of became more and more ornate. Like here you see a fairly elaborate icon screen. And really, there's also sort of a pattern typically to the icon screen. Like here, to give an example, this is a little bit different, but some of the things that are common, like you will always see to the right of the center doors, the first icon is always an icon of Christ. To the left, it's always an icon of the Virgin Mary. Typically, the doors have icons of, typically, ours is actually wrong, but this icon is typically Archangel Gabriel. No, I'm sorry, this is Michael, and this is Archangel Gabriel. And then the next icon's out. In our case, it's a little bit messed up. But in this case, the next icon out is the icon of the patron saint of that church. So this looks like St. Nicholas. So I'm saying this church is dedicated to St. Nicholas. In our case, you see an icon of St. Constantine and Helen. Oftentimes on the doors, which you see it here and you see it in ours as well, you see a depiction of the Annunciation. So you see the Virgin Mary and then the Archangel Gabriel announcing that she's going to conceive the Christ child. Not infrequently, ours is fairly low key. Not infrequently, you'll see above that sort of the different feast day icons. So it's hard to tell, but that looks like that's the presentation of the Virgin. That's the baptism of Christ. That looks like the birth of Christ. Hard to tell, but usually you'll see that. That's not uncommon. So yeah, there's other things that kind of vary, but those are sort of standard things. And typically there's, as I said, there's 3 doors, right? So there's the center door, which really only the priest and the bishop go in and out of, sometimes the deacon. And then side doors, which are used typically, like when we have processions, the altar boys will come out this door, and then they'll typically either go in this door or they'll split and go into both doors. Also, the deacon, when the deacon comes out to serve, he will almost always come out this door, and then he'll go back in the other door. So this is sort of the kind of the structure of the church. Any questions?
Oops. You had mentioned the chant stands, and typically, say, recently, 2 chant stands, 2 deacons, right?
Deacons, just chanters.
Chant.
Yeah, they're not deacons. Yeah.
So are they? So do Orthodox churches typically have 2, just 1, or?
I'd say 80 to 90% of the time, there's 1 chanter. Yeah, probably because usually there's not that many chanters. You don't need more than 1. So yeah,
Actually, I found there's the secret.
no. Yeah, that's actually typically, that's, what is your, what are you seeing that to be?
So it is on, is it only on cathedrals?
That is different though. That, the synthronon typically, let me see what we're looking at.
The bishop chair.
So, yeah, but that in the cathedral, typically that it's, now it's kind of confusing, but if there's a synthronon, usually it's in the back. It's in the back. There's sort of, to be honest with you, I'm not that much of an expert, but sometimes, especially in cathedrals, they'll have a throne for the bishop under the icon of the Virgin Mary. And there's a point in the service where he'll go and stand there. So that's what the synthronon is usually. Yeah.
The other thing I was wondering is this similar to the tabernacle? Like in the tabernacle, there was a holy place and there was another section was a most holy place.
I would say kind of. I mean, certainly the church is sort of harkens to that, right? So, I mean, even in the temple in Jerusalem, which of course doesn't exist anymore, right? But there were places where like some people can go, then there was places where fewer people could go, and then there was like the Holy of Holies where only the high priest could go. Right? So there is, I think, a sense of that. I mean, certainly, personally, like the sanctuary in particular is really the only people that go there are people that need to go there, typically the priests. And there, of course, is an altar, as there is, in the Holy of Holies temple. So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely there's a parallel there for sure. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. I don't know what happened. It's been that way ever since I've been here. I think they just put it up wrong, to be honest.
It's the slant. It was,
It's slanting the wrong way. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. No, it's not correct. That's Gabriel, and that's Michael. Yeah, because Michael always has a sword. See, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. Before I got here, long before I got here.
They should be.
I mean, according to all the iconography I know, which isn't tremendous, but it's ample, they are reversed. That icon should be there, and that icon should be there. There'd probably be an insurrection if we did that. Probably would. Pitchforks coming after father. Exactly. It's family. So this is a picture of inside the sanctuary, right? So on the other side of the icon screen. And really the things that, stand are obviously the altar table, which is where the bread and the wine are consecrated, where, the liturgy is performed. Typically on the altar table, the main things you'll find are, there's a gospel book, usually a blessing cross. Sometimes, I'm not sure what this is, but sometimes, well, whatever. This is like a tabernacle, they call it, or a artophorion, which means the bread holder, I guess. So typically what happens is the church, the priest at various times, usually during Holy Week, will consecrate, normally at liturgy on a normal Sunday, I consecrate one cube of bread that becomes the body of Christ. But usually on Holy Thursday, I consecrate two. One of them is consumed in the liturgy that day. The other one, I actually dry out and I cut up into little bitty pieces. I store it in the tabernacle, right? In our case, we have a tabernacle in back as well, same location. And that's basically for emergencies. So if someone's dying or someone is in the hospital, or if I'm doing shut-in visits, I can't just, have a spontaneous liturgy. So I always have some Holy Communion ready to go. It's dry. Usually what I do is I cut it up and then I dry it out. So it becomes like a cracker, just totally dried out. And then I have a little cup I put it in and it stays there. And when I need it, I have it. Also in the altar, well, you know, we're going to come back to that. Then there's also two sort of side tables. This is the prothesis, and this is called the diaconicon. The diaconicon is doesn't really, it's more just like of a storage place where I can put things and books and whatever else. The protheses, that, oh, I should have brought a photo. I don't know. Let's see. Nope, I don't. So on the protheses is where I prepare the bread and the wine prior to liturgy. So on a typical Sunday, we have liturgy starts around 9:30, but from about 8:15 until about 9:30, we do another service called Matins or Orthros. And while that service is being done, I am preparing the bread and the wine for the liturgy. So as soon as Matins is done, that's all done, covered, and ready to go. And then when I start the liturgy, I have the bread and the wine. Well, we can talk about that more another time. But any questions about that? All right. So that was sort of what I would call the other thing. So the other kind of dynamic, I call it the horizontal flow or the horizontal dynamic that we see in the church is kind of what I would call like penitential and also catechetical. And really neither of these are done anymore. So these are really like historical remnants that we don't actually do. But the penitential, so in the early church, if someone had committed a very grave sin, let's say someone had committed adultery or had killed someone, there would be a process of that person would be denied Holy Communion for a period of time. They'd be excommunicated. And then there would be a process over maybe years for them to be received into the church, right? And part of that in the early church would actually involve them physically being not in the church. So for example, typically the way it would work, let's say someone did something really bad, like murder. What would happen is initially, after that person was given their penance, they would spend a certain amount of time where they would spend the whole of liturgy, the whole service in the narthex. Then after a period of time, they would be allowed to come into the church for the first part of liturgy. But then as soon as the gospel and the sermon were done, they would have to go out and be in the back again. Then they would be allowed to stay in the nave the whole time, but they wouldn't commune. And then eventually they'd be allowed to commune again. That was sort of the process.
Doesn't that kind of give the people away?
Well, that's how they do it. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you're right, man. That's probably part of the reason why we don't do it. But so that's the penitential component, and the catechetical component, which we still, if you come to a pre-sanctified liturgy on a Wednesday night, Lent, or a Friday morning Lent, you still see this. We don't really do it, but we use the term, we use the prayers. And what it is when someone is a catechumen, meaning they're wanting to become Orthodox, but they haven't yet been received into the church. What the church had done in the past is that as soon as the epistle, the gospel, and the sermon were done, then there was actually a set of petitions, which we don't really do anymore, telling the catechumens, those who aren't yet Orthodox, to depart. And so what would happen is all the catechumens at that point would go and they'd stay in the narthex for the rest of the service. They wouldn't be in the main church until it was over, right? So this was sort of a kind of just dynamic, so they'd be in the back, but they wouldn't be in the church, right? So anyway, does that make sense? Okay. So that was the horizontal. Now we're going to turn quickly to the vertical flow of the architecture, right? So not only is there a dynamic that sort of goes from here to here, there's also a dynamic that goes from here up to there, right? And really what we see, I mean, is, at the lowest level, we see us, right? So we are on ground, we're flesh, right? We're still, the term the church sometimes uses is we are, there's two terms. One is, for us, we are the church militant, which means we are the ones that are still in the world, sort of slug it out, right? And then there's the church triumphant, and that's the saints who have triumphed. They're no longer in the world, they're up in heaven now. They've been triumphant, right? So we start at the bottom, with us, right? The church militant. And then we sort of go up to the next layer, and here it's kind of clear. You see the icons of the saints, right, all around us. And it kind of brings to mind this passage from St. Paul's letter to the Hebrews, where it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off, the witnesses being saints, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, right? So it's kind of like, like a Sunday night football, right? Where you got the players on the field who are like doing the work, and then you have the fans in the crowd for cheering them on, right? So we're the players, and they're the fans in the crowd, right? So that's kind of the second one. And then there's the next layer up is sort of the apse. So apse is a technical term for that back dome part in the church. So you always have an icon of the Virgin Mary, which you see in the back here. And that icon is called, the name for it is the platitera ton uranon. Platitera ton uranon, which means, in English, it means the one who is wider than the heavens. Would you guys know why we call her the one who is wider than the heavens?
You mentioned last time because
she held the uncontainable in her womb, right? And so the church says, wow, she contained what cannot contain. So she herself is wider than the heavens. So that's always there, and that is sort of in a sense, we don't have an icon of Christ in the dome, but if we did, the Virgin Mary is sort of that bridge that takes us from us to the saints, to her, up to Christ, right? And then finally, a dome, which we don't have. You have an icon. Normally, you'd have an icon of what's called the Pandokrator, which literally means the one who rules over all. So it's an icon of Christ. I should have, but it's typically an icon where he is holding a gospel in one hand, and he's kind of he's blessing with the other. Usually he has a fairly stern sort of look about him, right? To the one who rules over everything.
so do you also have an icon of the Virgin?
In the back, yeah, yep, should. I mean, if it doesn't, it would be very weird. I don't think I've ever seen one that didn't. I mean, some are bigger, some are smaller, but she would always be the back center icon. Should be.
Like I think it's depending on, because sometimes they dedicate a church to like one of the saints. Sometimes
Yeah. Makes
this one always.
But in the no matter who the Orthodox Church is dedicated to, that back icon is always the Virgin Mary. Yeah, I mean there might be exceptions, but I've never seen them. I don't remember. Correct. In the same way that remember how I said the icons, there's always Christ and the Virgin Mary and then John the Baptist and then the saint of the church. That's pretty standard. Rarely would you see anything different. Again, I don't think I've ever seen anything different. And then the other thing is when the church is built, eventually, depends on the parish and the bishop, eventually it's consecrated, right? And so the consecrated church basically means we take it and there's a special service that's done. And really, it's interesting because there's really three things that are done that are significant when a church is consecrated. And it's a service that's typically done. I've only been to one in my life, and there was a Vesper service the night before, and then the next day it was done as part of the liturgy, right? And there's three things that are done in the service. One is the consecrating of the altar. So actually, ironically, this picture is that's the consecration I did, because he used to be my boss, Father Joseph. So this is a picture. I was here. I was probably standing like over here. So anyway, I had a front. It was great because I had a front row seat, right, as a priest. So the first thing that's done is the altar table itself. So this is the altar table, same as ours. There's like a little shoebox sized hole in it that goes down. It goes down about, I don't know, maybe 6-7 inches, and it has a bottom, right? So the first thing done is that relics of saints, typically martyred saints, are actually sealed in the altar table. Literally, they're sealed in. What he's pouring there is actually melted wax. So he's going to fill this whole thing up with wax, and and the relics are already in there. So the relics are going to be permanently sealed in wax in the altar. And then actually the next slide, this is the altar again. They've sealed it, and he put wax around there's like a lid to that hole. And now they're just kind of flattening it out. They're kind of scraping off the extra wax. So then that's done. And then the next thing that's done, and this all kind of ties in, it really is, it ties in with in the same way that a person is received into the church. How is a person received into the church? The person is baptized and cremated, right? Or confirmed, right? When a church is officially consecrated, it is also baptized and chrismated, right? And you'll see what I mean in a second. So after that's done, the next thing that's done is we wash, baptize the altar table. Literally, we pour water on the altar table. You see these bars of soap and sponges? We literally wash the whole altar table down, literally. I mean, I was part of this. I was literally one of the people that washed this altar table down. I don't know. They look like, but yeah, so we soap it down, we pour water, then we dry it, we take towels and dry it off. So we baptize. I mean, that's really what it meant, is we baptize, consecrate the altar table, right? So that's the first thing that's done. Well, the second thing after the relics are sealed. And then we chrismate the church. And what do I mean by that? Is we take, well, it depends on the church. In this case, they had some really high ceilings. So they had this gigantic accordion stick, and there's a sponge at the end. And they dip the sponge in the same thing that they would chrismate you with, like chrism. They dip it in chrism. And then we anoint all the icons. He goes around and he anoints every single icon. So here it was a lot easier because these icons are a lot lower. That's what he's doing here. He's literally anointing. I don't know if that's the same church. I don't think that's the church I was at. I think it's a different photo. You can tell. But that's what's done, right? So we have we seal the relics in the altar. We baptize the altar. We chrismate the rest of the church, right? And then the church is consecrated. Any questions, comments, any of that? No? All right. And then that's actually done prior. So typically, to be honest, I'm trying to think of what the order was. So I think what happened is the relics. Were you here when this church was consecrated? Oh my gosh. Wow. That was like 88, I think. Yeah. Oh yeah, it would have been late. Yeah, so there is a point in the service prior to this, for obvious reasons, when everyone kind of goes out. We have the relics, and we literally process around the church with the relics. So it's kind of like we're sort of marking our territory, like we're drawing a holy line, right, around the church, right? So that's true. Then then what happens is at the door, and I don't have this there either, but the door is closed. There's actually a dialogue between the bishop and someone inside the church who there's like a conversation. I could probably find it when we're done if I can. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. But there's a dialogue. Hold on one second. Let's see. This one? Let's see here. Entry into the church. Yeah, patents, Eucharist, matrimony, holy orders. I'm not sure it's not that one. There you go, 55. There you go. Okay. So I'm going to learn something myself. So, let's see here. Oh, blessed is. But yeah, so there is this dialogue that happens, and typically the bishop actually takes his staff and he sort of bangs on the door. Yeah, so I'll have to maybe for next time I'll see if I can find that. And then eventually oftentimes then what happens they usually they'll often have like a sort of a someone who is like the godparent of the church who will sort of they oftentimes like they'll have a ribbon or something across the door and they'll cut the ribbon with the bishop and then everybody goes in and they process in with the relic and they bring the relic straight into the altar and then this begins, right? They put the relics in the altar and do all of this stuff. So yes, I jumped ahead. You know what? I'll find that out for you for next week because I have to do a little research because there's a dialogue and it makes more sense in the context of the dialogue.
Can you go back to almost like the Palestine?
Yeah.
The images of like Jesus.
This is John the Baptist, Christ, and the Virgin Mary. This is a somewhat common. Yeah, so this is so even here, like remember how I said you always have an icon of the Virgin Mary? That's this one, right? So that is this one, and then you have I'm trying to. Yeah, actually, I think this is the church I was at. No, but yeah. So there's a lot of different ways. There's not a lot of ways you can do it, but there's at least some degree of like variation that you do within the iconography. Any other comments, questions? So I'm actually going to stop there. It's at 7:57, and I have a few slides, but not enough to take too long. Any other comments? Anyone on Zoom have a comment or a question or anything? Okay.
Going back to sort of at the very beginning, what was debated at the councils, and then there's the debate of why the Armenians were not putting water in the wine. Water. The sword and water came out? Like, why?
Yes. In fact, it's tricky you say that because actually I wasn't. You're smarter than me. Because even when the priest is preparing, remember how I said the priest, there's that nook where he prepares the gifts. Here, right? So there's when I get to the point where I do that, where I pour the water and the wine in, the prayer is, let's see here. A soldier pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water flowed. And he who saw it has testified, and his witness true. And while I'm saying that, I pour the wine and then I pour the water. So yes, I would say that's why. It's because that. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
Actually,
Now's your chance. I'm here. These rugs?
yeah. The only reason I'm asking is because I think that's the image one we have.
So the double-headed eagle is really just that's the symbol of the Byzantine Empire. That's really what it is. I mean, it's hard to tell. Let me see here. Yeah, it's a double-headed eagle with a crown, and I don't know what's in its feet. A lot of times, let's see here. Yeah, you can't really tell. In this case, it's got like a globe and it's got a sword. But that image is sort of that's if you were to find like a flag of the Byzantine Empire, that's exactly what it has on it. You can look if you want. It'd probably be, I think it's yellow, the black double-headed eagle.
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask until I noticed the same here.
Oops, what just happened? What did I just do? Any other questions? All right. Oh no. What did I do? I am. Yeah, let me see if I can find the double eagle real quick. So let's see here. In Empire flag. Yeah, this is exactly what's on our. The only difference is that this one is this one has in our case the ball is here and the sword is here, but that's that's the flag of the Byzantine Empire. So obviously there's no Byzantine Empire. Yeah, not for any particular reason. I just stand in the center. I don't aim for one of them. Yeah. No, although interestingly, when and I don't really know the practice, but in the Russian practice, when a bishop comes, they will put like this round carpet like in the middle of the church and he stands in it. I don't know why, I don't know what the rubrics are, but I know that's typically done. What were you going to say something about somebody else? I don't even know where I just try to center myself. That's about it. It also depends how many altar boys there are, because if there's more, then I'm back. But I don't aim to stand on one of them. No. Yeah. Can I say something, Jason?
Oh, no.
Okay. Well, that is all we have. So let me stop sharing and we can close with a prayer. All right, let's pray. My hope is the Father, my refuge, the Son, my shelter, the Holy Spirit, a holy Trinity. Glory be to thee. Amen. All right, thank you. If you guys want to help move things, I'll happily take your help. Where is this cursor? Bus stop.